Hi there, dear Truth Warriors. For those of you who are new to the channel, welcome. My name is Petra. I'm a life coach and advocate for survivors of narcissistic and emotional abuse. So today I would just like to make a very short and simple video on generational trauma. And this is something that we are not always aware of, where we feel certain things, we go through certain emotions, and we're not sure where this feeling, where mental illness, for example, where that comes from. And oftentimes it has to do with the trauma, the unresolved trauma that is passed on from parent to child, from ancestors to your grandparents, your parents, and your parents onto you. And as long as we don't feel the trauma and we don't deal with the trauma, then of course there is no way we can heal this trauma, and we then pass the same trauma onto the next generation. And so it is perpetuated. So trauma is, of course, you know, when you look back to my mother's generation, for example, to our parents' generation, trauma and pain and emotions were not something that were freely discussed. It was something that, you know, don't air your dirty laundry. It was something that was sort of covered up, and if you were going through any sort of emotional pain, you had to just deal with it in silence. Don't speak about it, because we don't speak about those kinds of things in the family dynamic. So this is also a generation that I grew up in, is that my parents were very loving and very open with very many subjects, but when it came to really talking about feelings and emotions, then that was sort of swept under the rug. And it's not to put blame or guilt on them, it is simply showing how we have evolved as well as a human race, where we now want to lift the stigma that has been put on trauma, that has been put on mental illness. We need to lift that trauma. It is up to us, to this generation, to break that stigma and to talk about these things that affect millions of people worldwide, people who suffer in silence. And I don't think that is appropriate for the times that we are living in and for the trauma in our family. We need to speak about it. We need to get it out into the open, because once you get that out into the open, that's when true healing can start to take place. You know, trauma is perpetuated in silence, in mystery, in not speaking about it. And the people who are suffering from trauma, the people who are suffering from mental illness, feel that they are weird, feel that they are crazy, because there is so much stigma put onto these very important aspects of human society. So as a baby, we are, you know, by one of our caregivers or both parents, we are mirrored. This is how we learn to interact. This is how we learn to see ourselves as well. So I've said this in previous videos, you know, when you are a primary caregiver, or you had a parent who was very loving and who nurtured you the way you should have been nurtured, then this is what we get to see. You know, when you smile at a baby, when you make funny faces at a baby, when you make certain sounds, the baby mimics that. And when you have a parent who is not capable through trauma, through having the narcissistic personality disorder, they do not know how to interact with the child. So they go about abusing the child. They go about doing what was done to them is the same abuse that they inflict onto their children. So when you have missed out on this as a baby, as a young child, then there is a gap. There is a gap. You don't know how to relate to the world. And foremost, you don't even know how to relate to yourself. And this is when we speak of a lost identity. So, you know, the trauma is something that needs to be spoken of. The trauma is something, especially if you are in therapy or if you're in counseling, for those of you who have allowed me to work with you as well, these are things that are brought up. You need to speak through the trauma. You know, and that is why I find it so important when I speak to clients, is that they tell their story, because you need to speak it out. You need to speak your truth. And don't forget that trauma is also something, it is an energy form. Trauma is energy. Because even though we may not know what kind of trauma our ancestors or our parents went through, our cells remember. Our body remembers. Everything about our existence remembers that something is wrong. And when we don't know the details of the trauma, then we just carry around this resentment and this anger, and we don't know what to do with it. So the way to go about that is to speak about it. As I said, I love talking. I think this is the most important thing that we can do today in society, is talk about what is bothering us, talk about our anger, our resentment. It needs to come out into the open. So there was I don't know, it was said to me, I read it online, or I saw it in a video I was watching. I don't really remember, but what did stick with me is that when we have been through narcissistic abuse, we tend to label the other person as the devil. And even though their actions and their abuse may be horrific, and in most cases it is horrific, we refer to this behavior as the devil. And when you turn the word devil around, it spells lived. Now we have all, every single one of us has lived through some form of trauma. And this is how the devil shows up. But when you tap into your inner resources, when you realize that you are in control, you have the power to heal yourself. It's not what I say as a coach. It's not what a therapist says to you. It's not what a psychologist says to you. It has to do with your own inner power. And oftentimes we go through life so blindly and not realizing that we have this inner power to heal whatever trauma is within our system, is within our mind, is within our emotions. And this is what we need to tap into. We need to realize that the devil that we speak of, the devil that we feel, when we talk about our inner demons, it's trauma that we have lived through. And the very fact that you're still here, you're still functioning, that you're, watching this video, means that there is a longing and a calling within you to heal that trauma. And this is something that you need to do so that you do not pass on this trauma to the next generation. Now, I've lived through this, in my family. I have seen this. I have been through it myself, where something just was not right. You feel that there's this anger, there's resentment, as I just said. There's all this emotion that's going on within you, and you don't exactly know how to pinpoint. You don't know exactly where it's coming from. This has to do with generational trauma. So the way to break that trauma is to voice it. Voice your truth. This is so important. And stop giving your power away to those who have abused you, to those who tell you that you need to shut up and not speak about the things that you've been through. This is where your healing is. This is something that you need to open up for yourself. Speak about the trauma and speak your healing into existence, because we all have that power. It's not what someone else tells you. Yes, I as a coach, for example, can give you the tools to do that, but ultimately it is up to you to heal that trauma. So just remember that you are not weird. You have been traumatized. And this trauma is something, when you become aware of it, when you realize that it is a generational thing that has been just passed on and passed on, that you may even be witnessing yourself passing on that same trauma to your children, that you act in ways that your parents did, that maybe your grandparents did. This is awareness. And when you become aware of what you are doing, this is key. Awareness is key to healing. When you become aware of it, then you can take the steps in feeling that trauma, feeling the pain, Because what do we often do? We run away from pain. We don't want to feel it. We don't want the stress. We don't want the agony. We don't want any of that. It's a normal way of responding. It's a very human way of responding. But if we do not respond to the trauma that we're feeling, to the emotions that we are feeling, then we cannot heal it. And then we cannot show next generations how to live a fulfilled life. So it starts with us. Thank you again for watching, and take care of yourselves, and looking forward to speaking to you all next time. Love to all of you.